I was folding laundry in my living room when I heard the doorbell ring, and when I opened it, 2 police officers were standing there with grave expressions, asking if I was Virginia Hartley, mother of Catherine Hartley. And before I could even answer, the older officer said, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry to inform you that we've just discovered your daughter died 3 years ago. Her remains were found in a ravine 50 miles from here, and we need to ask you some questions about when you last saw her, because her husband never reported her missing and has been collecting her Social Security disability checks for the past 3 years while telling everyone, including you, that she was alive and well." I felt the room spin around me, felt my legs give out, because I'd been talking to my daughter on the phone every week for 3 years. She'd sent me text messages and emails and birthday cards. We'd had conversations about her life and her marriage and her plans for the future. And now these officers were telling me that the person I'd been communicating with, the voice I'd heard on the phone hundreds of times, was not my daughter, but her husband, Derek, imitating her, keeping up an elaborate deception while my daughter's body lay in a ravine, and I never knew she was dead, never got to say goodbye, never got to attend her funeral, and I'd spent 3 years thinking she was alive when she'd been gone the entire time. My name is Virginia Hartley. I'm 72 years old, and I need to tell you about the most horrifying discovery of my life, about how I lost 3 years with my daughter without knowing she was gone, about the monster who stole those years from me, and about how sometimes the people we trust most are hiding unimaginable secrets. Let me take you back 6 years so you understand who my daughter Catherine was, what happened to her, and how her husband managed to deceive not just me, but everyone who loved her for so long. Catherine was my youngest daughter, born when I was 38 years old, a surprise baby who came along when my older 2 children were already teenagers. She was my miracle child, sweet and sensitive and deeply artistic. And from the time she was small, Catherine saw beauty in everything around her. She loved to paint and draw, spent hours creating these incredible landscapes and portraits, and everyone who saw her work said she had real talent, that she could make a career as an artist if she pursued it seriously. But Catherine also struggled with depression from her teenage years onward, had periods where she couldn't get out of bed, couldn't see the point in anything, couldn't find joy even in the art she loved. We got her into therapy, tried different medications, supported her through the dark times, and there were good periods too, times when Catherine seemed happy and stable and full of hope for the future. She graduated high school, went to community college to study art, and seemed to be building a life despite her mental health challenges. When Catherine was 24, she met Derek Palmer at an art gallery opening where she was displaying some of her paintings. Derek was 32, worked in finance, drove an expensive car, and he seemed completely enchanted by Catherine's artwork and by Catherine herself. He courted her intensely, showing up at her apartment with flowers, taking her to nice restaurants, telling her she was the most talented artist he'd ever encountered, and he wanted to support her career. Catherine was swept up in Derek's attention, and within 6 months they were engaged. I had concerns about Derek from the beginning, though I couldn't articulate exactly why. Something about him felt controlling, the way he'd answer questions directed at Catherine, the way he'd make decisions for her without asking her opinion, the way he'd subtly criticize her appearance or her artwork while pretending to be supportive. But Catherine was so happy, so excited to be getting married, so convinced that Derek was her soulmate, that I pushed my concerns aside and told myself I was being an overprotective mother who couldn't accept that my daughter was growing up. They got married in a small ceremony, and Derek immediately started making changes to Catherine's life. He convinced her to stop taking her depression medication, saying she didn't need pills, she just needed his love and support. He persuaded her to quit her part-time job at an art supply store, saying he made enough money to support them both, and she should focus on her art. He suggested they move to a house in a rural area about 60 miles from where I lived, saying Catherine needed peace and quiet to create her best work. At first, Catherine seemed happy with these changes. She'd call me every few days, talking excitedly about the house, about having a studio space, about all the paintings she was working on. But gradually, over the first year of marriage, Catherine's calls became less frequent. And when we did talk, she seemed subdued, distracted, like she was choosing her words carefully. When I'd ask if everything was okay, she'd say, yes, everything was fine. Derek was wonderful. She was just tired or busy with her art. I tried to visit Catherine several times during that first year, but Derek always had excuses for why it wasn't a good time. He'd say Catherine was in the middle of an important project and couldn't be disturbed, or they had plans that weekend, or the house was being renovated and it was too messy for visitors. When I pushed back, saying I just wanted to see my daughter, Derek would get slightly cold, would say I was being intrusive, that Catherine and he needed space to build their marriage without interference. Catherine never contradicted Derek about these visits, never called separately to say she wanted to see me, and I started feeling hurt, started thinking maybe she really didn't want me around. Maybe I was being the overbearing mother Derek implied I was. So I backed off, gave them space, told myself Catherine would reach out when she was ready. Then, about 4 years ago, Catherine called me crying, saying her depression was back and worse than ever, that she couldn't paint, couldn't eat, could barely get out of bed. She said Derek was angry with her, saying she was weak and lazy, refusing to let her go back on medication or see a therapist because he didn't believe in Western medicine. I told Catherine she needed to take care of herself, needed to get help regardless of what Derek wanted. And Catherine said she knew, but she was afraid of making Derek angry, afraid of losing him. That conversation terrified me, and I called Catherine every day for a week afterward, checking on her, trying to convince her to leave the house and come stay with me for a while. But Derek started answering Catherine's phone, saying she was sleeping or painting or not available, always with a pleasant tone, but with an underlying message that I needed to stop calling so frequently. And when I did talk to Catherine, she sounded flat and emotionless, like she was reading from a script, saying she was fine, feeling better, sorry for worrying me. I should have driven to that house right then, should have insisted on seeing Catherine in person, should have called Adult Protective Services if I couldn't get to her. But I didn't, and that failure haunts me every single day. Because if I had acted on my instincts, if I had pushed harder, maybe Catherine would still be alive. About 3.5 years ago, Catherine's calls stopped completely. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing, and I was frantic with worry. I called her phone constantly, left dozens of voicemails, sent text messages begging her to call me back. Finally, Derek called me, and he sounded upset, apologetic, saying Catherine had had a severe mental health crisis and had checked herself into a psychiatric hospital for intensive treatment. I immediately asked which hospital, said I wanted to visit, wanted to be there for my daughter. But Derek said Catherine had specifically requested no visitors, that she was ashamed of her condition and didn't want anyone to see her like this, that the doctors said family pressure could make her worse, and I needed to give her space to heal. He promised to keep me updated on her condition, promised that when Catherine was ready, she'd contact me herself. And then the communication started. Emails and text messages from Catherine's phone and email account saying she was in treatment, saying she was getting better, saying she loved me, but needed time and space to focus on her recovery. The messages felt a little off. The language wasn't quite right. But I told myself mental illness changes people, that medication can affect how someone writes, that I was being paranoid. After 6 weeks, Derek called again and said Catherine had been released from the hospital, but was still fragile, still not ready for visits or phone calls, but was doing better and wanted me to know she was thinking of me. Then the phone calls started. Weekly check-ins where Catherine would call and we'd talk for 15 or 20 minutes about general things, her treatment, her painting, the weather, how I was doing. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I missed, all the signs that something was wrong. Catherine's voice sounded slightly different, a bit higher, a bit more forced. She never FaceTimed or sent photos, even though she'd always loved taking pictures. She couldn't remember specific details from our past, would get confused about family stories or events. She never asked about her siblings by name, would just say, "How's everyone?" instead of asking about her brother Paul or her sister Michelle specifically. But I explained all of this away, told myself the depression and treatment had affected Catherine's memory, that she was still healing, that I should be patient and supportive instead of demanding and suspicious. And Derek was so helpful, so attentive, always following up after Catherine's calls to say how grateful Catherine was for my support, how much progress she was making, how important it was that I continued to give her time and space. This went on for 3 years, these weekly phone calls with the person I believed was Catherine, these occasional emails and text messages keeping me updated on her life. Derek would send photos of paintings that Catherine had supposedly created, beautiful landscapes that looked like her style, but something about them felt off, too perfect, too polished. He'd relay messages from Catherine, tell me what she was doing, how she was feeling, what she wanted me to know. I missed my daughter desperately, missed being able to see her in person, missed being able to hug her and look into her eyes and truly know how she was doing. But I told myself this was temporary, that Catherine would heal eventually, that we'd rebuild our relationship once she was stronger. I told myself that at least I was still in contact with her. At least I knew she was alive and improving. At least Derek was taking care of her. Then 3 months ago, a hiker found human remains in a ravine about 50 miles from Catherine and Derek's house, in a remote area accessible only by a rough hiking trail. The remains were skeletal, badly decomposed, but there was enough left to identify through dental records. The police investigation determined that the remains belonged to Catherine Marie Hartley, and based on the condition of the body and evidence at the scene, she had been dead for approximately 3 years. 3 years during which I'd been talking to someone who wasn't her, receiving emails from someone pretending to be her, believing my daughter was alive when she was dead. The police contacted me with this information, and I remember screaming, collapsing, my brain unable to process what they were telling me because it was impossible. Catherine had called me just last week. We'd talked about her new paintings, about the books she was reading, about my upcoming birthday. How could she be dead? The officers explained that they'd immediately gone to question Derek about why he'd never reported his wife missing, and Derek had initially tried to maintain the deception, saying Catherine was traveling, was visiting a friend, was taking a break from him. But when confronted with evidence that he'd been the one making the phone calls and sending the messages from Catherine's accounts, when shown records of him collecting her disability checks, when faced with the reality that they had found Catherine's body, Derek finally broke down and confessed to everything. Derek admitted that 3.5 years ago, during one of Catherine's depressive episodes, they'd had a terrible argument. He said Catherine had threatened to leave him, to tell me and everyone else that he'd been abusive, that he'd been controlling her life and isolating her from her family. Derek said he'd lost his temper, had pushed Catherine, and she'd fallen down the stairs in their house, hit her head, and died instantly. Instead of calling 911, instead of reporting the accident, Derek had panicked, had wrapped Catherine's body in a tarp and driven it to that remote ravine and hidden it there, believing it would never be found. Then he'd concocted this elaborate plan to make everyone believe Catherine was still alive, but in psychiatric treatment, giving himself an excuse for why no one could see her while he figured out what to do long term. Derek had studied Catherine's voice patterns, practiced imitating her on recordings, got good enough at mimicking her that he could call me and her friends and sound convincing for short conversations. He'd taken over her email and text accounts, written messages in her style. He'd continued to collect her Social Security disability checks, which she'd been receiving for her mental health conditions, forging her signature on documents, living off her money while keeping up the fiction that she was alive. The police said Derek had become so committed to the deception that it had become second nature to him, that he genuinely seemed to believe on some level that he was helping Catherine by keeping her alive in people's minds, that he'd been doing this for her benefit. But of course, it was all for him, to avoid consequences, to keep collecting her money, to maintain his image as the devoted husband caring for his mentally ill wife. When I learned all of this, when I understood that I'd been talking to my daughter's murderer for 3 years while he pretended to be her, I became physically ill, couldn't eat for days, couldn't sleep, couldn't process the layers of betrayal and horror. My daughter had been dead for 3 years, had died alone in a house with a man who then disposed of her body like trash and went on with his life. And I never known, never suspected, never got to mourn her properly because I thought she was alive. The forensic investigation determined that Catherine's death was likely accidental, as Derek claimed, that the head trauma was consistent with a fall downstairs, but that Derek's failure to call for help and his disposal of her body and his 3 years of deception constituted multiple serious crimes. He was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter, abuse of a corpse, fraud, identity theft, and dozens of other charges that could result in 25 years in prison. But no amount of prison time would give me back my daughter, would give me back those 3 years I spent believing she was alive and getting better, would erase the memory of all those phone calls with a man pretending to be Catherine. All those conversations where I'd poured out my love to someone who was mocking me, even as he pretended to be my child. I had to tell Catherine's siblings that her sister had been dead for 3 years, had to watch them process the same horror and betrayal I was feeling. Paul, my oldest, became enraged, wanted to kill Derek himself, had to be physically restrained from going to the jail. Michelle went into a state of shock, wouldn't speak for days, just sat staring at photos of Catherine, trying to understand how this had happened. We had to plan a funeral for Catherine 3 years after she died, had to bury remains that barely resembled the beautiful young woman we had loved. The service was unbearable, knowing that we should have held it 3 years ago, that we'd missed that chance to properly say goodbye, that Derek had stolen even that from us. I stood at the grave where we laid Catherine's coffin, and I apologized to her over and over, told her I was sorry for not pushing harder to see her, sorry for believing Derek's lies, sorry for failing to protect her. The police investigation revealed even more disturbing details. Derek had cleaned out Catherine's studio, had sold most of her original paintings for cash, had destroyed her personal journals and photographs, had systematically erased evidence of her real self while constructing this fiction of a Catherine who was alive but unavailable. The paintings he'd sent me photos of, claiming they were Catherine's new work, were actually paintings he'd purchased from other artists online, his way of keeping up the illusion that Catherine was still creating art. He'd also been having affairs during those 3 years, dating other women, telling them his wife had left him, that he was divorced and available. He'd used Catherine's death as an opportunity to live whatever life he wanted without the inconvenience of being married, while still collecting her benefits and avoiding consequences for what he'd done. Some of Catherine's friends came forward after Derek's arrest saying they'd had suspicions that Catherine's social media posts seemed off, that they'd thought it was strange she never video chatted or met in person. But like me, they'd accepted the mental health explanation, had believed Derek's assurances that Catherine just needed time and space, had never imagined the truth could be something so monstrous. I spent weeks going through all the messages I'd received from Catherine over those 3 years, reading them with new horror, knowing they'd been written by Derek, seeing how he'd manipulated my emotions, how he'd played on my love for my daughter to maintain his deception. Some of the messages were particularly cruel in retrospect, like one where Catherine had written, "I love you, Mom. I'm doing so much better. Don't worry about me. Derek is taking such good care of me." Reading that now, knowing Derek wrote it, while Catherine's body was decomposing in a ravine, makes me physically ill. The trial started 2 months ago, and I've attended every day, forcing myself to sit in that courtroom and face Derek, to hear the evidence against him, to understand exactly what he did to my daughter and to all of us who loved her. Derek's defense team tried to paint him as a man who'd made a terrible mistake in a moment of panic and then got trapped in a deception he didn't know how to escape. They presented him as a victim of circumstances, someone who'd meant well but handled things badly. But the prosecution showed emails Derek had sent to friends joking about how easy it was to fool people, showed credit card statements proving he'd spent Catherine's money on luxury items and trips with girlfriends, showed evidence that he'd researched ways to dispose of bodies and avoid detection. This was not a man trapped by circumstances. This was a calculating predator who saw an opportunity and took it. I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. And I stood in front of that courtroom and told Derek exactly what he'd taken from me, told him about the 3 years of conversations I'd had with him thinking I was talking to my daughter, told him about the grief I'm now experiencing, knowing those conversations were lies, told him that he didn't just kill Catherine, he killed 3 more years of my life by making me believe she was alive when she wasn't. Derek cried during my statement, but I don't know if those tears were genuine remorse or just performance for the jury. I don't know if he truly understands what he did, if he's capable of understanding the magnitude of his cruelty. And honestly, I don't care anymore what Derek thinks or feels, because nothing he could say or do would ever make this right. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before finding Derek guilty on all charges, and the judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole for the first 15 years. Derek will be nearly 60 years old when he's eligible for release. And while that gives me some small satisfaction, knowing he'll spend a significant portion of his life in prison, no sentence would feel adequate for what he did. Now, I'm trying to piece together what really happened in those last days of Catherine's life, trying to understand what she went through, whether she knew Derek was dangerous, whether she was scared, whether she suffered. The police say, based on the forensic evidence, Catherine's death was likely instantaneous, that she probably didn't feel pain, but I'll never know for sure, and that uncertainty torments me. I've been going through the few possessions of Catherine's that Derek hadn't destroyed, boxes of old sketchbooks and childhood mementos that had been stored at my house, and I found something that broke my heart all over again. In a sketchbook from about 4 years ago, Catherine had drawn a self-portrait where she was behind bars, and she'd written in small letters at the bottom, "Sometimes marriage is a beautiful cage." She'd known, even then, that Derek was trapping her, controlling her, isolating her, but she hadn't known how to escape or hadn't felt strong enough to try. Paul and Michelle and I have tried to support each other through this nightmare, but we're all grieving differently, all processing this trauma in our own ways. Paul is angry all the time, raging at the world, at Derek, at himself for not seeing the signs. Michelle has withdrawn completely, barely leaves her house, can't handle social situations because everyone wants to ask questions about what happened. And I feel empty, like someone hollowed out, like the mother I was died along with Catherine, and what's left is just a shell going through the motions of living. I've started therapy, working with a specialist in traumatic loss, trying to process the complicated grief of losing someone twice, first believing they were alive, and then learning they'd been dead all along. The therapist says my grief is compounded by the betrayal. that I'm not just mourning Catherine, but also mourning the 3 years of false hope, mourning the relationship I thought I was maintaining with my daughter that turned out to be a sick charade. Some days I'm angry at Catherine for not reaching out more before she died, for not telling me how bad things were with Derek, for not giving me a chance to save her. But then I remember how depression works, how it makes you feel like you're a burden, how abusive relationships make you feel like you deserve the treatment you're getting. And I know Catherine was doing her best in an impossible situation. Most days, I'm angry at myself for not seeing through Derek's deception, for not insisting on seeing Catherine in person, for accepting his excuses and explanations. I replay every phone conversation, every text message, every interaction with Derek over those 3 years, and I see all the moments where I could have questioned more, could have pushed harder, could have found out the truth in time to properly mourn my daughter. But the therapist keeps reminding me that Derek was skilled at manipulation, that he'd had practice controlling and deceiving Catherine for years before her death, that he knew exactly what to say to keep people believing his lies. She says I couldn't have known, that no reasonable person would have suspected their son-in-law was pretending to be their dead daughter on phone calls, that it's not my fault I was fooled. Still, the guilt remains, heavy and constant, this feeling that I failed Catherine when she needed me most, that if I'd been a better mother, more attentive, more suspicious, I might have saved her life or at least discovered the truth sooner and been able to grieve properly. I've tried to find comfort in the fact that I did tell Catherine I loved her during those phone calls, that even though it was actually Derek on the other end, I still expressed my love, still reached out, still tried to maintain our relationship. But it's not the same. And it doesn't ease the pain of knowing those expressions of love were received by my daughter's killer, who probably laughed at them, who definitely didn't deserve them. Catherine's artwork is all I have left of her now. The painting she created before Derek destroyed her, before he took her life and then took her identity. I've hung several of her landscapes in my living room, and I sit and look at them for hours, trying to see what Catherine saw when she painted them, trying to understand the mind of my daughter who could create such beauty, but couldn't see a way out of her situation with Derek. I think about all the conversations I'll never get to have with Catherine, all the experiences we'll never share. She was only 28 years old when she died, so young, with so much life ahead of her. She'll never have children, never grow old, never fulfill her potential as an artist. Derek took all of that from her and from me and from everyone who loved her. And I think about those 3 years of false hope, those 3 years when I thought Catherine was getting better, was healing, was building toward a future where we could reconnect properly. Those years where I told friends, my daughter is doing so much better, she's in treatment, but she's making real progress. When Catherine was already dead, the embarrassment of that, the humiliation of having been so thoroughly deceived compounds the grief. People in my community have been supportive, but also morbidly curious, asking intrusive questions about the details, wanting to know what it was like to talk to Derek pretending to be Catherine, whether I suspected anything, how I could have been fooled. Some of them I can tell are judging me, thinking I should have known, should have done more, and that judgment, even unspoken, is painful because I'm already judging myself more harshly than anyone else could. I've started a small support group for other family members of homicide victims, and hearing their stories helps me feel less alone, helps me understand that grief after murder is different from other grief, that it's complicated by rage and betrayal and unanswered questions. One woman in the group lost her son to a drunk driver, and she says she understands something of what I'm feeling because the drunk driver also lied, also tried to cover up what he'd done, also stole not just her son, but her ability to trust. Last week was Catherine's birthday. She would have been 31 years old, and I went to her grave and spent hours there, talking to her, telling her everything I wished I'd been able to tell her in person before she died. I told her about the trial, about Derek going to prison, about how sorry I was that I couldn't protect her. I told her that I loved her, that I always loved her, and that I wished I'd told her that more often when she was alive. And I promised Catherine that I would honor her memory by speaking out about what happened, by warning other families about the signs of abuse and control, by making sure her death wasn't meaningless. That's why I'm telling this story now, even though it's painful, even though I'm still raw with grief and trauma, because if sharing what happened to us could save even one person from a similar fate, then perhaps Catherine's death will have some purpose. If you're listening to this and you have a family member in a relationship that concerns you, please trust your instincts. If someone is isolating your loved one, making excuses for why you can't see them, controlling their communication with family and friends, please push harder than I did. Be the annoying mother or sister or friend who insists on in-person visits, who doesn't accept excuses, who calls adult protective services if necessary. And if you're listening because you're in an abusive relationship yourself, please know that it's not your fault, that you're not weak for staying, that abuse works by making you feel like you can't leave or shouldn't leave, but you can leave and you should leave. And there are people who will help you if you reach out. Don't let fear or shame or love for your abuser keep you in danger the way Catherine did. I wish I could go back 3.5 years and be more insistent about seeing Catherine, more suspicious of Derek's excuses, more willing to be the overbearing mother he accused me of being. I wish I trusted my instincts about Derek from the beginning, when I first sensed something wasn't right about him. I wish I taught Catherine that it's okay to leave relationships that aren't working, that being alone is better than being with someone who controls and diminishes you. But I can't go back, and Catherine is gone. And all I can do now is live with the guilt and the grief and the rage and try to make sure other families don't experience what mine has experienced. All I can do is tell the truth about what Derek did, about how easy it was for him to deceive everyone, about how we must be more vigilant, more suspicious, more willing to intervene when we see warning signs. Derek stole my daughter's life, and then he stole 3 more years from me by making me believe she was still alive. He stole my chance to properly grieve, to say goodbye, to be there in Catherine's final moments, even if just in spirit. He stole memories we should have been making, conversations we should have been having, healing that should have been happening. And while he's in prison now, while justice has technically been served, nothing can give me back what he took. I'm 72 years old now, and I don't know how many years I have left, but however many there are, I'll spend them carrying this burden, this knowledge of what happened to my daughter, this guilt over failing to protect her. I'll spend them trying to honor Catherine's memory, trying to warn others, trying to make sense of senseless tragedy. And I'll spend them remembering the real Catherine, the daughter I loved, the artist who saw beauty everywhere, the sensitive soul who struggled with darkness but created light through her paintings. Not the fiction Derek created, not the voice on the phone that was never really her, but the real Catherine who lived and laughed and loved and deserved so much better than what Derek gave her. Thank you for listening to my story, for bearing witness to what happened to my daughter Catherine and to my family. If this story affected you, if it made you think about the people you love and whether they're safe, if it reminded you to trust your instincts when something feels wrong, please leave a comment below. Subscribe to this channel to hear more stories about loss, survival, and the importance of speaking truth even when it's painful. Give this video a like if you found it meaningful, and please share it widely because somewhere out there might be another Catherine, another person trapped in an abusive relationship whose family is being deceived by someone like Derek, and maybe this story could help someone see the warning signs in time to save a life. Thank you for listening to my story, and please, please, trust your instincts and protect the people you love because the monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like devoted husbands who are just taking care of their sick wives.